Hello and welcome to another episode of Distant Words. Today we're talking about US presidents. US presidents, of course, have influenced and shaped the course of US history, but they've also shaped one other thing, and that is the dictionary, or at least a select few words in it. Over the years, whether by accident or in the case of Thomas Jefferson by design, many words have left the mouths or the writings of US presidents and have remained in the lexicon of not only this nation, but in some cases other nations around the world. And so without further ado, we're going to take a look at some of those words that were surprisingly coined or popularized by US presidents. Okay, I cheated a little bit with this one. It's not simply a word, but a phrase on the bandwagon, meaning to attach oneself to anything that looks likely to succeed. And, given the time period in which this was coined, it's no surprise that it was coined at that time. Of course, bandwagons themselves were quite a popular mode of travel. Now, the phrase itself was first attested in the writings of Theodore Roosevelt. Now, a bit of a disclaimer here, though, that the phrase did come about in those writings prior to his presidency. They first show up in some 1899 writings in which he writes, "When I once became sure," and this is not how he spoke, I assure you, "when I once became sure of one majority, they rumbled over each other to get aboard the bandwagon." And speaking of getting on the bandwagon, Teddy was not the only Roosevelt to do so. Ah, the word iffy. Now, where would I be without that? But I should state that there is something a little iffy about the attribution here. We do know that it's first attested from the late 30s, around about 1937, and it is associated with Franklin D. Roosevelt. However, it is important that one should state for the record that I couldn't find any instances in which he directly said this, and there were no sort of writings produced by FDR that used this word. It was used by somebody else attributing it to him in World This Week from May 9th, 1937, in which this person says, "Very iffy Mr. Roosevelt might characterize such talk," as if to say this is a word he commonly used, and thereafter it became a popular word and it's been used ever since, just to mean that something is a little off. Whereas you may belittle its inclusion in this very list, you're unlikely to do so with our next entry. Because it is the word belittle. As I've said many a time, this word is first attested in the writings of Thomas Jefferson. It shows up in his writings about the state of Virginia, and it was sort of in refutation against French naturalist Georges Louis Leclerc Buffon. I think I might have butchered that pronunciation, but that particular individual asserted at the time that American animal species, that is, species that were sort of unique to North America at that time, he asserted that they were naturally smaller and therefore inferior to European ones. He'd obviously never met a grizzly bear, as I haven't either. But Thomas Jefferson described those antics as having belittled the species on this side of the pond. And the last thing you want to do is undermine the confidence of a raccoon. It will come at you with a hammer, not necessarily with its bushy tail. But Thomas Jefferson's usage of belittle at the time provided yet another marker, another indicator that American English was there for derision. People back in England and in Europe heavily derided his use of belittle in this sense.
Belittle? What an expression! It may be an elegant one in Virginia, and even perfectly intelligible, but for our part, all we can do is to guess at its meaning. For shame, Mr. Jefferson!
But, of course, it's one thing to be attacked for your linguistic choices by scholars on the other side of the pond. Our next entry had to endure it from those closer to home. After moving to the United States, I became aware of this word normalcy, a word we don't really use in the United Kingdom, where we are more likely to say normality, and that particular word, normality, was the norm for even Americans back in the day, prior to 1920. It all changed in that very year due to the presidential campaigning of one Warren G. Harding, who campaigned on a promise to return to normalcy.
America's present need is not heroic, but healing. Not nostrums, but normalcy. Not revolution, but restoration.
And that was in the sense of returning to the way that life was prior to World War I. And prior to World War I, indeed prior to 1920, the word normalcy was in existence, but it meant something completely different. It was a mathematical term that essentially pertained to the condition of being at right angles, and in that sense, Harding was perceived to have misused the word, a malapropism of sorts, and was derided in the press for doing it. In fact, the press at the time were correcting his usage to normality, and he actually picked them up on that later on. But it was interesting that they should deride him, because even at the time he was seen as someone who was quite bumbling, someone that went off script and wasn't the greatest speaker nor the greatest speech writer. And it's interesting that he should do that and then popularize another word, which is the word bloviate. The word bloviate is an American coined word. It was in action in the 19th century, but started to see a dip, a decline, until he brought it back. Many commentators at the time pointed out that Harding himself was a prime example of one who bloviates. So the word squatter, who would have thought this would be attributed to a president, especially one of the founding father presidents, but it was attributed to James Madison. The word squatter shows up in a letter that he wrote to George Washington in 1788, in which he wrote, "Many of them and their constituents are only squatters upon other people's land, and they are afraid of being brought to account." Imagine you're writing to the President of the United States, George Washington, and you just make up words. And George Washington is apparently fine with it, because he also makes up words. That's right, the word administration. Now, of course, the word administration had been around prior to this, but not in this sense, in the sense of a president's period in office. So George Washington's administration. He coined that word in 1796. Indeed, he did so in his farewell address, ironically. It was a sort of retrospective look back, and he used it in saying this: "In reviewing the incidents of my administration, I am unconscious of intentional error." Which, you know, if he hadn't been consistently ranked as one of the greatest presidents of all time, he may well have been accused of having done the following. Sugarcoated, to sugarcoat, to make a bad situation seem better by layering it thick with sugar. Not literally, that would be insane. But this word is first attested from the 1860s. Indeed, it was found in a message to Congress on July the 4th, America's Independence Day, in 1861. And that should give you a clue as to which president uttered it. It was, of course, one Abraham Lincoln, who said in his address, "With rebellion," again, this is not the cadence of Abraham Lincoln, "thus sugar-coated, they have been drugging the public mind of their section for more than 30 years, and until at length they have brought many good men to a willingness to take up arms against the government." So after that, weirdly, objections did come to Lincoln's use of sugarcoat, because it was seen as kind of unpresidential at that time, to which Lincoln responded thusly, if thusly is indeed a word: "The time will never come in this country when the people won't know exactly what sugarcoated means." Let us know in the comments below if Lincoln is correct about his assertion there of the words longevity. I hope it is, because I happen to think it is a good word, and that's not just me jumping on the bandwagon. Thanks for watching this episode of Distant Words. Let me know in the comments below which is your favourite word that was coined or popularised by a president. And until next time, cheerio. They didn't coin that one. Thank you for watching this episode of Distant Words. Don't forget to hit my stupid little face to subscribe, and please share this video with the world. Hit me up on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook, and if you'd like to support this channel, please do so at patreon.com/lostinthepond.